Well, welcome everyone to the first webinar of the Animal Law section of the State Bar of Michigan. My name is Allie Phillips and I am the 2020-2021 chair of the Animal Law section, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Sheltering Animals and Families Together. Before we begin, I would just like to share a little bit about the Animal Law section. We were the first statewide animal law section in the United States, and we were created in 1995. So we are celebrating our 25th anniversary. It is comprised of more than 200 animal law professionals. We promote public policy and legislation to advance the protection of animals, and you can find our policy statements on our website. We offer a newsletter for our attorney and law student members that goes out about 2 to 4 times a year, and has done so since 1997, thanks to one of the current and the founding members, Don Garlett. We put on educational events typically 1 time a year, but due to our current situation, the symposium committee of the section is launching this webinar series. So a big thank you to B. Friedlander, a founding section member, Ann Griffin, who is the past chair of the section, and Kate Brindle, who is the chair-elect, for working with me to make this happen. We also give 3 awards annually, 1 to a law student, 1 to a legislator or lawyer, and 1 to an animal advocate for extraordinary work on behalf of animals. And any attorney or law student is welcome to join our section. So if you have questions throughout today's webinar, please feel free to put those in the chat. And if you want to click on gallery view, because I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint, in the upper right-hand corner under view, if you just want to click on gallery view, you'll see everybody, or if you click on speaker view, you will primarily see Russ. So today's speaker is Russ Mead. He is a popular lecturer nationwide who uses examples from his career as General Counsel for animal rights organizations to illustrate animal welfare and other animal-related laws. Russ has served as General Counsel for 2 of the best-known animal sanctuaries, Best Friends Animal Society and Farm Sanctuary, and served as Farm Sanctuary's interim executive director. Russ is the Shared Earth Foundation visiting professor at Lewis and Clark Law School, where he has also taught on animal agriculture law and policy, animal law fundamentals, nonprofit animal law, nonprofit law legislation and lobbying, and animals law litigation. Russ also has experience implementing and managing large-scale animal rescues, including during Hurricane Katrina. He has been involved in animal hoarding cases, each involving hundreds of animals. He's involved in legislative advocacy on behalf of animals and authored the textbook Nonprofit Animal Law. And I hear that you are also quite the artist. So Russ, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, welcome to everybody. This is obviously an odd way to conduct these seminars, but it works. I've done this a couple of times before in a Zoom basis. I've given these presentations all over the country over the past decade or so. As you can tell from the introduction, I'm an animal rights lawyer, is how I describe myself. And one of the things that I really care about is keeping all of you employed as lawyers. So what my focus here is to point out things that you might come across as an animal law advocate who is also a lawyer. So the thing that overreaches all of this is when we're out there doing advocacy work, we're still lawyers and we're still bound by the rules of professional responsibility. So the format that I come up with, again, a long time ago, is create this just crazy hypothetical. I mean, there is nothing real world about this, except for the fact that almost every wrong thing that I'm going to show you this person's done, I've seen somebody do. Nobody's ever done them all at one time in one place, but these things really do pop up. It's tongue in cheek. It's supposed to seem outlandish for a reason. And then we're going to circle back and talk about some of the things that Billy Miller, our advocate lawyer, is doing. So the format is this. I'm going to read a pre-prepared presentation, a hypothetical that I've drafted just for you folks. And then we're going to break into Zoom rooms for about, let's say, 4 minutes each. and then come back. And then I need some help from you. So when we come back from those Zoom breaks, put in the chat column comments that you think, 5 words, 7 words about issues that you think have come up, so that then when we come back, we can discuss them, meaning I'm going to talk about them. I've been asked whenever possible to apply this to your state law, which, by the way, is different in the rules of professional responsibility than the model rules. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but there's a lot of things that aren't overlap. So I took the time to map those in. And so we'll be talking about the rules that really do apply to you by your own state law. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. First, let me introduce Billy Miller to you. Billy is an animal lover, an animal activist, and a lawyer. Billy lives in the town of Lakeview. Billy's a bit of a character and knows everyone in town. Billy's practice is estate planning. Lakeview has a large population of retired residents, some of which have significant wealth. Billy has a pet every time I give one of these hypotheticals. This time, Billy's pet is a large rat. Trevor, the rat, rides along with Billy everywhere Billy goes. Billy has a specialty backpack that has a large plastic bubble out the back so that Billy can go everywhere with Trevor. Trevor even has his own tiny harness so that he can ride around in the car with Billy safely. Everyone in town loves Trevor, and most people around town at least like Billy. Billy lives in a lake home that's been in her family for generations. Her office is on a boathouse that's been converted to a small office. Billy practices as a solo practitioner, as most lawyers in her area do. The controversy this time around centers around a local animal shelter. The shelter itself is a governmental entity, a subdivision of a city, actually. There's a 501c3 nonprofit auxiliary that helps support the local shelter. The controversy revolves around the adoption practices of the shelter. Lakeview Shelter Auxiliary runs the adoption program at the shelter. The auxiliary is putting undue restrictions on dog adoptions. Adoptions are run by the volunteers of the Lakeview Animal Shelter Auxiliary. The shelter itself does not have enough money to have a city employee run the adoption program. The problem is the auxiliary board is controlled by a rich retiree with strong opinions about who is a proper candidate for adopting a dog. Bill Baxter has implemented 2 policies that makes it difficult for people to adopt dogs. The first is that to adopt a dog, Bill Baxter requires the family to have a fenced backyard. But many people who want to adopt a dog can't afford a fence. Or these families live in rental housing that came without a fence. Many of these people do have people at home all day who could walk the dog at regular intervals. But that's not good enough for Bill Baxter. No fence, no adoption, no exceptions. The second requirement is that if the owners work, Billy requires the owners hire a dog walker, pay someone to come out and walk the dog during the day. In Baxter's mind, having a neighbor walk the dog during the day is not good enough. Billy only believes that professional dog walkers should be used to care for the dogs in this community. Bill Baxter is being called out as being both an elitist and a racist for instituting these policies. There are 2 different groups involved with challenging these policies. The first is Latinx Leadership Council. The Leadership Council believes these policies are straight up racist, as many of the community members in homes, many of their members live in homes that don't have fenced yards. The second group interested in the topic is a nonprofit named Dogs Off Chains, or DOC for short. This group doesn't care if a dog family has a fence or not. What they care about are dogs left on chains all day if the owners don't have a fence. So the group is involved in any discussions that revolve around how dogs are contained during the day. This group believes that dogs who are chained are more likely to bite when the dogs are finally let off the chains. This is important. Billy is a volunteer for Dogs Off Chains, or DOC. This is a time of COVID-19. The Latinx Leadership Council is no longer having any face-to-face meetings. So they do get together and have Zoom meetings. The Leadership Council has called a community meeting to discuss the low number of adoptions to family of color. The discussion quickly turns to accountability for the shelter's adoption practices. The executive director of the Leadership Council sees Billy on the call and calls out to her. Hey, Billy, glad you could join us. If we want to sue someone over these adoption policies, should we go after the nonprofit who is running the adoptions, or should we just try to nail the city directly? Billy, who is a will and estates lawyer, has no idea how to answer the question. But Billy does not want everyone in town to know that she doesn't know the law. So Billy answers anyway. Yeah, right. It's definitely the auxiliary biller, he says. Again, without having as a clue as to who would be responsible or both. There is no way Billy was going to admit that she did not know the answer to the question. All right. So with that, we're going to take a quick break. But I need to add one small fact. After this meeting, Billy calls the executive director of the Leadership Council and wants to just chat about this and says, hey, what do you think about me going to the mayor and seeing, where the mayor stands on all of this? And then Billy also points out that, I've got a rich client that gives money to the mayor, so I might be able to really help out here. What do you think? And then the executive director says, sure, Billy, go ahead. So now we've got Billy tasked with this project of going ahead, but Billy's busy. And so Billy doesn't get around to doing anything for the next 3 weeks. All right, with that, there's a couple of issues that are going to jump out. One is going to go into a fairly lengthy discussion. So go into the Zoom rooms, come back in 4 minutes. And then when you get back in the chat section, go ahead and make small comments of issues that you see come up. Just identify the issue, and then we'll talk about them.
Oh, she scratched. Well, we're going to help.
So some people may have stepped away, so they have not clicked on the button to get into their room.
Okay. Here we go. They're starting to come. Okay, I can see we're all back. So now to help me out, go over to the chat section. There's a little pull down menu at the bottom of your screen that says chat. Click on that to activate the box. And then where it says type message here at the bottom, go ahead and add a line, a few words, something at least that I can see that an issue's been identified so that we can talk about it. Okay. Got governmental immunity. Okay. What else did we see? Think of this from a professional responsibility type. No proper attorney-client relationship formed yet. Advice is being offered. Advising on legal matters she doesn't know about. Good. Well, let's go ahead and continue typing conflicts of interest. Let's go ahead and I'll start on these. These are big ones. The most important thing that you will hear today is this very first issue that we're going to talk about, and that's the creating of the attorney-client relationship. So when we volunteer for nonprofits, you know, we want to help out. We're lawyers, so we're asked legal questions, we give legal answers. That's the way that we feel most valuable in donating our time. I mean, sure, the shelter needs to have somebody help them, you know, clean up, walk the dogs, and paint. But how many people can be out there and actually, you know, helping them with their annual filings, or, you know, if they're concerned about liability or looking at their liability waivers. And so we have a tendency as lawyer advocates who are interested in helping animals to jump in with our legal expertise. But here's the rub. You know, are we creating an attorney-client relationship? And what I'm going to tell you next will shock most of you. And it should scare a lot of you. That's why I'm saying it first. In your state, as well as most states, it doesn't take much to form an attorney-client relationship. It is as simple as this. If an organization or a person or a potential client asks you to do any legal work, and that includes answering legal questions, and you perform that work, congratulations, you have a brand new client, my friends. All of the responsibilities from the model rules of professional responsibilities have now attached. All right, wave if you say, this scares the hell out of me. We're all waving to each other. And I'm not going to do what I sometimes do in person, which is raise your hand if you've done this, because we don't want, you know, this is being recorded. We don't want to do that. But yes, you now are the lawyer for this organization. So just think of all of the different ways this comes into play. You're at a bar association function. You're having drinks. If somebody comes up and asks you a question, you know, you're like Billy, you know, you're not going to break out your computer and look up the answer to something. You're not going to have an intake interview. You're not going to do a conflicts check. You're just going to answer off the top of your head. All right. Maybe you won't because you know about this, but I have seen it almost at every gathering I've ever been to at lawyers. People are asking each other questions. People are giving answers. How about the cocktail parties? You're at a wedding and somebody finds out you're a lawyer. Anybody been in that situation? You know, somebody comes up and starts asking you about, you know, the child support modification, or what about that neighbor's tree that's hanging over my fence? Can I eat their apples? Or I mean, whatever it is. They ask the question, anything out of your mouth other than, I'm sorry, we can't talk about that now. Make an appointment to see me in my office or give me a call, establishes an attorney-client relationship. It should scare you. So don't do that unless you want to do that. So if you want to be associated with a nonprofit and you want to do legal work for them, just know going in that it requires that you become their lawyer. You're going to become their lawyer, whether you like it or not, if you're in there helping them in this manner, and then treat them like a client. So we would never do what Billy did if we had a paid client where we're answering questions off the top of our head. I mean, I've been practicing law, lots of decades, and I might give some generic black letter law, but I almost always follow it up with, but I need to go do a quick check. I need to look a few things up. It's not because I don't know the area of law. Of course I know the area of law, but no, I want to make sure that I haven't forgotten something. And that certainly happened to me where I forget about that exception, or you want to see if the law has changed. Then you circle back down, usually very quickly, said, yeah, it's as I thought, here's my answer. We research things to provide good information for our client. When we don't consider our clients, and these folks are your client. Okay, so at this stage, if we were, all right, because I want this to be interactive. Now over in the comment column, type something about if you're surprised about this, or this is the first time you've heard it, or yeah, I've known this my whole life. Let's just give each other some feedback. And by the way, I'm always transparent. The reason I'm doing this is to make this feel more interactive. So we feel like, we're getting our money's worth, even though this is the time of COVID. So let's get a couple comments over here. While you're doing that, I'll address the next issue, which is competence. I mean, you can certainly take on matters in areas that you don't know about. But Michigan, like most other states, says that you got to bring yourself up to speed. You've got to do research. You can co-counsel with other people. You can attend a CLE. You can, buy a horn book. You can do lots of different things to get up to speed in an area that you don't know about. Yeah, it's surprising to me, a bit surprised. Even true if you offer advice pro bono, yes. I mean, the one thing you can't do is say, yeah, I'm giving you advice, but I'm a half-ass lawyer, and so you got to agree not to sue me if I give you bad advice. I mean, that's the equivalent of what you're doing. Do you really think that the ethics committee, the people who can have the power to take away your bar license, are going to say, oh yeah, they made that disclaimer, so they're off the hook? Or in a malpractice claim, they would say, oh yeah, no, you can't sue them. They said, that they're not responsible for giving you bad advice. No. If you're their lawyer, they're your client, it all attaches. So yeah, it should surprise you a bit. I've got this nuance. All right, so here we've got one. My understanding was that it's a bit more nuanced, so that if you offer the appropriate disclaimers, you can offer general opinions, though not formal advice. Let me put this in context. If this ever comes up, it's because the licensing authority is after your bar license or wants to censor you. That's the context. Do you think that group is going to say, oh yes, you gave it the proper disclaimer, so no, we are not going to uphold our rules of professional responsibility in our consumer protection law to protect people against bad lawyers? That gets you off the hook? It's a rhetorical question. It's not going to carry weight. So you can try to make that nuanced argument, but you just don't want to be making that nuanced argument. And you have to keep in mind the context that's going to come up. It's either going to come up in that or a malpractice lawsuit against you. And what do you think a jury or a judge is going to say there? Oh no, you can't sue them. Case dismissed because there was a line in your engagement contract that says you're only given general opinions. No, you're going to have to defend that suit all the way through. All right, next up. So we've got, advising things you don't know anything about, you can, but you got to bring yourself up to speed. there's going to be more conflicts of interest come up. The delay in handling the matter, Michigan, like everywhere, there's a diligence requirement. You have to act with reasonable amount of diligence in carrying out your representation. Waiting 3 weeks, you know, that might be too long, probably is too long without at least getting back. There's also requirements to communicate with your client, keeping them informed of what's going on. That didn't happen. Again, as soon as this triggers that they're a client, all of this comes into play, and treat them as if they were your best client who, you know, sends work to you every month and they pay you well. I mean, you owe these people the same duty. With that, we're going to go on to segment 2. Billy is sitting on the dock eating lunch with Trevor the rat. Bill Baxter, the chair of the Lakeview Shelter Auxiliary, pulls up, gets out a fishing pole and a cooler of beer. Bill stays 8 feet away from Billy. Remember, it's COVID. This is a proper COVID distance, but not far enough away to suit Billy. Billy starts in. So this is a lawyer again. Billy starts in. Who do you think you are, Bill Baxter? You're keeping dogs locked up in the shelter rather than adopting them out to good, loving homes. Not everybody who lives here are rich white people. What are you talking about, Billy? We have rules and we're simply following the rules. You need a fence yard to adopt a dog. If you work, you need to hire a dog walker. If you can't afford either, you shouldn't own a dog. Billy fires back. Hey, pal, most people I know work for a living and love their dogs. The exception here is you rich bastards who get a kick out of keeping dogs locked up. Billy's on a roll and doesn't stop there. Oh, and by the way, big shot, if you don't relax those adoption standards, I'm going to be blogging out that your girlfriend Stella is getting free Meals on Wheels. Just think about how that's going to affect your persona as a rich man down at the country club. By the way, Stella is entitled to Meals on Wheels because Stella's elderly mother lives with Stella. With this, Bill Baxter reels in his fishing line and storms off the dock. Trevor the rat goes over and finishes Bill's sandwich. It was avocado on sourdough, and Trevor just loves local sourdough bread. Billy figures it's time to approach the mayor to see how the mayor sits on this whole adoption equation. Billy sets up a Zoom call with Sandy Krause. It's a lunch meeting with both agreeing to eat while on the call. Trevor is also invited and is eating tiny pear cubes. He likes pear cubes. Hey, Mayor, starts Billy. The animal shelter's under fire. The mayor responds, yeah, Billy, I know. Billy, you should think about taking over that auxiliary society and straightening things out for us. Billy answers, can't, Your Honor. I just make people matter. Hey, in case you haven't heard, I'm the bleeding heart liberal animal rights lawyer. The mayor does respect Billy and seriously asks, so Billy, give me a straight up answer on this. Explain what's going on. Billy explains. The shelter adoptions are run by a volunteer rich white dude, Bill Baxter. He never seems to adopt animals to people of color or people who don't live in rich neighborhoods. The Latinx Leadership Council is all over the shelter because of the adoption numbers to people of color are low. The council says a fenced yard is not necessary as long as there's a chain in the yard to keep the dog tied up. But the anti-dog chaining group, Dogs Off Chains, is opposed to the Leadership Council's wanting to substitute a chain for a fenced yard. Dog Off Chains believes that chains turn dogs mean and bite people. They're right about that, Mayor. This group is advocating for the removal of the entire requirement for a fence or a chain. So what should I do, Billy? Asked the mayor. Billy answered, well, I would fire back to the Leadership Council to get rid of the fenced yard requirement. Almost any adoption household is better than keeping the dogs in a shelter, or worse, euthanizing the dogs because of space. By the way, Mayor, I'm handling the charitable and political contributions of my rich client, Melissa Can. Melissa says hi and wants to remind you that she supports diversity issues. Now, Billy does handle distributions for Melissa Can, but was lying about Melissa saying hi to the mayor or about instructing Billy to mention the diversity issues to the mayor. Okay, I'll think this over, says the mayor, and the screen goes dark. Billy goes to the lake and opens up her laptop to update her blog site, Billy's View from the Dock. Billy posts, hi, everyone. I have an update on the shelter adoption controversy. I met with the mayor and filled her in on the leadership council's position as well as the dog off chains position. I can't get a read now on how the mayor will weigh in on this, but my own view is that anything is better than those dogs staying in the shelter one day longer than necessary. 10 minutes after posting this blog, the blog explodes. The leadership council is angry that Billy is talking with the mayor about dogs off chains positions. Dog off chain is even more angry that the dogs off chains position is being pitched alongside of the leadership council's concerns. Both groups are now angry at Billy. Billy pours a glass of wine and gets the computer back out. Just a heads up, blogging with an open bottle of wine is never advisable, especially for a bleeding heart liberal like Billy. Billy then posts this. Hey, I was just trying to help out on this dog adoption thing, but I'm out. Not going to help anyone. You all just going to need to figure this one out on your own. By the way, I have my pet rat, Trevor, and Trevor is not fond of dogs anyway. For what it's worth, this is also a lie. Trevor just loves dogs. All right, with that, go into Zoom rooms for, let's say 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and chat about it. All right, here we go. Billy was speaking for many people, and she shouldn't have been, including Doc and her trust client. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest things that jump out on this is there's a conflict. I mean, clearly it's wrong to be using the rich client in there who's really not part of this at all. I mean, that's wrong on, so many levels. It violates confidences. It's not authorized. It might not be in the client's best interest. I mean, that could be a whole disciplinary hearing in itself with that one component. But I've set this up where Billy is a member of DOC, and so what does that mean? Does she represent him or not? And what that's going to hinge on is what she's done for them in the past. If she's, just come and gone to events that would raise awareness about getting dogs off chains, she probably doesn't represent them. But most likely they've been asking her legal questions and she's been firing back legal answers, and most likely she represents them. And if that's the case, now you've got a conflict as well. So you've got this conflict, and you're trying to, represent both of these entities and try to work something out. Now, here's how this happens. When we are lawyer advocates, we have a tendency not to think of these issues in terms of our client, because frankly, we often don't even view these folks as our client. We tend to think of these issues in terms of the animals. What's in the best interest of the animals? How do we get those dogs off those chains? How do we get those dogs out of that shelter and into people's homes? So when we work on things like this, and I think of all of the hundreds of projects I've worked on, I mean, the focus is usually on what's best for the animals. But what's best for the animals is not what should be your concern when you have a client. And so that's the real rub here, is that just trying to help the animals isn't good enough, because the animals aren't your client. It's one of these groups is your client. All right. Talking to our client via the public blog. Yeah, there's, confidentiality. You should be talking to your client in a private setting. You need to identify who you should be talking to at the client. Executive director on these types of things would probably be, the most appropriate. Let's see. What else do we got? making false statements in a public manner. Yes, there's a duty. In particular, it's duty to tribunals, which includes more than judges, by the way. It includes things like public officials. You can't lie to the mayor, on anything. So if you're there on representing somebody and you're a lawyer, you have to be truthful. And so even the small lies, violate the rules of professional responsibility. Leaving clients unrepresented. Yeah, when you've got a client and then you stop representing them, you have to withdraw. I mean, there's page after page of procedures of what you have to go through to withdraw from a client, notifying them of different things that might be coming up, looking at the trust account balances. I mean, on and on and on, ways to stop representation. You can't just blog out there, "I quit." That's not going to do it. And of course, it's embarrassing the way she's done it. We're on there. One that didn't get picked up on is trying to influence somebody by implying that you've got particular sway with a public official. That's just flat prohibited. You can't imply that you have special ends with public officials. That's just outlawed, Michigan as well as in most places. And one that most people don't know about, but is interesting, is there's a flat prohibition about involving third parties to any matter where the purpose is to embarrass them. So that little piece about, hey, I'm going to, call out your girlfriend for taking Meals on Wheels help, that's flat prohibited. You can't bring in third parties with the sole purpose of embarrassing. There's a whole separate rule on that. All right. So let's go ahead and see what happens next, the last segment. With all this pressure on Bill Baxter's, the Lakeview Humane Society Auxiliary resigns from the adoption committee. So Bill Baxter quits. The Humane Society adopts a new set of adoption criteria that does not include the requirement for a fenced yard or a paid dog walker for adoption. But more importantly, the Lakeview Humane Society adopts a non-discrimination policy in all adoption practices. Billy decides to throw a virtual party to celebrate this change. In Billy's blog, Billy puts out a Zoom invitation for a virtual sunset happy hour. 50 people or so show up for the Zoom call. Through one of the shelter's connections, the 80s rock band REO Speedwagon signs in and plays "Can't Fight This Feeling" to get the party started. People are getting drunk at home and in docksides all around the lake. A discussion starts up on how evil Bill Baxter has been in this whole process. One attendee posts the following in the chat section: "We should all go over to Bill Baxter's boathouse and sink that speedboat of his. That will teach him to never get in the way of adoptions in the future." Billy says to the group, remember this is in the chat room, "Be careful out there. Sinking somebody's boat is a serious crime. You certainly don't want to get caught." The conversation then moves on to improving the shelter. Billy leads the charge in trying to get the shelter repainted. If we were in COVID, we'd all just go over there, grab some paint and spruce up the place. But we can't get together. So why don't we all kick in a few bucks and let the shelter hire a professional painter? The shelter director who was on the Zoom call says, "Hey, great idea, Billy, but how are we going to collect the money?" Then Billy says, "Well, hey, everyone, just send your donation to me on your personal Venmo account and I'll transfer it all over to the shelter." "Great idea," says the shelter executive director. "Keep in mind that Billy has represented the shelter in the past on some nonprofit issues." Then things start to get really weird. Charlie Ward is on the call. Charlie is a board member of the Dogs Off Chains, the anti-chaining nonprofit. Charlie starts a private message dialogue with Bill and Miller during the call. At first, the two flirt a bit. Then it gets downright hot. Before long, and Billy are in a private chat room with what would be called in polite society as phone sex. Eben's Billy pet rat Trevor was blushing at what was going on. Remember, this is COVID, and we've adopted this presentation for COVID. So with that, let's break for 5 minutes for discussion.
Horses are good at that too.
Yeah.
Everyone's back.
All right. So let's go over to the comment sections and let's put a few words in there. All right, commingling funds. So I use this as an opportunity to point out a best practice. What happens in real life, besides the Venmo thing, is you're often, when you volunteer for a nonprofit, you're asked to go buy things. You know, hey, there's an event, there's an adoption event, we need more ice. You know, here's $100 out of the donation bin, go get us some ice and, you know, bring back the change. I represented a large church once and learned this from them. The person in charge of that church refuses to handle any money. So if whenever she was doing something, she would pay for the nonprofit expense themselves and then hand a receipt getting reimbursed. Then you're never commingling funds. So I've adopted that practice. It works great. Never ever take cash or money from the client for these little things. Pay for it yourself and get reimbursed and you're out of the woods. Great best practice. Let's see, what else? Commingling funds, anything else? That's all we see? All right, I'll just jump into it. So the phone sex thing, interestingly enough, you folks don't have the prohibition against sexual relationships with clients. I don't know if that's news to you. I've run up against this in 2 other jurisdictions. One is Louisiana, where the argument was, yeah, but what happens when you want to have sex with your clients? And the entire, all of Canada, I was giving a joint ABA, Canadian Bar Association, and they said, well, that would be covered under so many other rules. We don't need to worry about it. In a strange way, both are kind of right. When you dig down into this, there are plenty of times when sexual relationships are appropriate with clients, and not being tongue-in-cheek. Let's say that you're in a long-term committed relationship, or you're married to somebody and then you need to represent them, let's say in a parking ticket or some kind of matter. You're representing your spouse, somebody you're having a sexual relationship with. It would seem to make sense that would be okay. The actual rule that other states have says that you can't have sexual relationship with somebody that you're representing unless you had that relationship with them before you started to represent them. Your state's just totally removed it. You still have conflict of interest. You still have all of these concerns about there being an imbalance of power, with your clients. And so it's as, quote, wrong as it is anywhere else. It's just going to come in for you folks in a different way. And then they don't have to carve out the exception for, ongoing sexual relationships that most people would say were fine or even, healthy. What else? This paying for third party. All right, I think.
Russ, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Whole issue about having sexual relationships with clients. I mean, the fact that she had, they did a side room. We were talking about that in our breakout. On a larger Zoom call with the potential of some technical glitch happening where suddenly they're caught, or, is there anything there that?
Oh yeah, I mean, if this was like, having sex out in public, or if this was an event at the lake, and everybody was there and they were just having sex in the back of a pickup truck, yeah, they would launch in. There's a whole series of rules, your state, most states, that talk about the integrity of the profession, and they're broad, sweeping terms. But yeah, that would clobber you on that as well. So yeah, a public display of inappropriate sexual contact would get it as well. Yes, so yes, good to identify that. All right, we've got a minute left, so I'm just going to read the last conclusion of how it ends, and then there's going to be a brief statement after on the next CLE. So a year later, everyone has forgotten about the entire incident. Dogs are flying out of the shelter and going to good homes. The community has built a world-class dog park. Neighbors take their neighbors' dogs to the park for nice long romps in the fenced community yard. And Billy and her new friend Charlie continue their late night private chats while Trevor the rat tries to forget what he's seeing. So all is well in Lakeview. And with that, I want to thank you. Again, the big takeaway is when you're volunteering for nonprofits, watch out to either not become their lawyer, or if you are, treat them as if they are a client. And with that, thank you very much. And I'm turning it over for the final announcement.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Gosh, I learned some things that I thought I knew. So this was very enlightening. I hope everybody enjoyed it. The interaction was amazing. I like the idea of the breakout rooms. So we're very thankful, Russ, that you took the time to be with us this afternoon and share this and educate us. So much appreciated, and keep up all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
So our next webinar is going to be next month on March 4th, and we're getting Court of Appeals Judge Amy Ronan Krause and 54A District Court Judge Kristen Simmons, and they're going to talk about how to avoid Zoom fatigue in hearings, trials, and during court arguments. So, you know, when I send you the link to this recording, I will be sure to send you a registration link for that if you are interested, and please share it with your colleagues. So we're going to go ahead and bring this to a close, and thank you everybody for joining in. This was our first webinar for the animal law section, and what a great way to kick it off. So thank you so much, everybody. Be safe and have a really great day.